Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on exploring Alberta's nuclear future. My name is Neil Chelland. I'm an Assistant Deputy Minister with the Ministry of Affordability and Utilities, and I'll be helping to guide us through this session today. This webinar is intended to provide a high-level overview of Alberta's nuclear engagement and to provide information about nuclear power facilities. Following a few presentations, we'll have a session for questions and answers that I hope you'll be able to participate with. As you'll hear, our discussion with you is one component of the overall conversation we're having across the province. Other conversations are ongoing with municipalities, Indigenous groups, and industry. And throughout this overall process, we want to hear from as many people as possible. What do you think we should be considering when related to a potential nuclear power industry moving into our jurisdiction? There's a few housekeeping notes about our session today. This session is being recorded and we'll make it available online so that anyone who can't be here live right now can still access the information that's being shared. All participants are muted to ensure that audio quality remains high for that recorded video. But please use the question and answer function. It's labeled Q&A at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions at any time throughout the session. We'll try to collect them and address them during the dedicated Q&A segment at the end of after a few presentations. Now, before we begin our discussion, I'd like to recognize that we're collectively meeting on land that is home to 48 provincially recognized First Nations, 8 Métis settlements, and other Métis community and organizations who share a long-standing relationship and history with the land. I would like to pay respect to all Indigenous peoples, regardless of where you're joining us from today. I invite you all to take a moment to consider your relationship with the Indigenous peoples in your area and steps towards reconciliation, which includes safekeeping of this land and respect for all people that we share with it. Now, we're honored to have a number of guest speakers and experts with us today. I'd like to acknowledge that we have a Parliamentary Secretary and member of the Legislative Assembly, Chantal de Jong, with us, and she'll provide leading this engagement, and she'll provide us with opening remarks shortly. We also have Professor Jason Donev from the University of Calgary, who will provide a Nuclear 101 session for us and help ensure we have a shared and factual understanding of nuclear industry. We also have members of the Alberta Nuclear Engagement and Advisory Panel, who will be introduced shortly. And we have experts from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, and Alberta Environment and Protected Areas to help out with questions. So thank you to our guests. We appreciate you lending your expertise to this critical conversation. And now, without further ado, I'm happy to turn the virtual floor over to Parliamentary Secretary MLA Chantal de Jong to provide an overview on why Alberta is exploring nuclear energy and how this engagement is unfolding.
Thank you so much, Neil, and very good morning to everyone. I'm pleased to kick off what I know is going to be an excellent session this morning on the future of nuclear energy in Alberta. And it's so important for our government to have opportunities like this to connect directly with Albertans and communities and hear what you have to say about the future of energy in our province. So we truly appreciate you being here and taking time out of your busy schedules, especially entering the holiday season, to learn about nuclear energy, the potential of nuclear energy in our province. So today we're going to explore what nuclear energy could look like in Alberta, facts about the industry, how nuclear energy could benefit Albertans and our economy. And we're also going to talk about challenges, risks, and steps to manage them if Albertans decide we should move forward. Nuclear energy offers the opportunity to diversify our energy resources in a world that's becoming increasingly reliant on electricity. And that's the reality our province faces. And we need to make sure that we're ready to meet growing electricity demands. And it's an exciting time to explore this technology because we're on the cusp of a technological revolution. Not only is energy security more important than ever, but we're seeing AI play a larger role in our everyday lives, and both play a significant role in increasing demand for electricity. Nuclear energy is a viable option to help meet our growing needs. It can power our homes, our offices, keep us warm through our lovely Alberta winters, and ensure reliable electricity that can fuel our growing economy. With nuclear, we would have a source of energy capable of providing reliable baseload electricity 24/7, regardless of the weather, while also helping government meet their emission reduction goals. Natural gas electricity will continue to play a crucial role in powering Alberta's grid into the future. However, if nuclear energy is paired with our existing energy sources, including our abundant and highly efficient natural gas power plants, we could strengthen both our grid and energy security for many years to come. Beyond these potential benefits, nuclear energy also presents a chance to unlock more of Alberta's incredible economic potential. New industry means good paying jobs, means more opportunities for people and businesses across the province. We certainly appreciate that all of this is new territory for Alberta, but we're not walking this path alone. Canada's nuclear power industry has been operating successfully for over half a century. Within Canada, there's a wealth of knowledge and expertise to draw on as we explore this technology. Alberta's listening and learning from existing nuclear jurisdictions, and whether that's through formal MOUs with Saskatchewan, Ontario, or New Brunswick, or through informal opportunities to talk with those with real world experience, we have the opportunity to hear about both the successes and challenges that can help us make informed decisions about nuclear energy. We're also working with a range of federal organizations that have the expertise to manage nuclear energy. And this includes organizations like the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which can both provide evidence-based information on nuclear safety and waste management. And these experts and these resources give us the confidence that if Alberta chooses to pursue nuclear energy, we can do so in a way that ensures safety, reliability, and sustainability. And it's not just external information sources and relationships that matter. It's also vital to hear perspectives and cultivate relationships within our province. And that's why in August, our government launched a province-wide public engagement to hear from Albertans, Indigenous communities, organizations, and stakeholders to gather their thoughts on nuclear energy. And for those who may not be aware, I serve as chair of Alberta's Nuclear Engagement and Advisory Panel. And today I'm joined by a few of my fellow panel members, the Honorable Darren Billis, Tim Boston, Stephen Buffalo, Dr. Rudy Cherning, and Dr. Harry Vredenberg. And our panel is leading the engagement on nuclear energy, and it was established to provide advice to Alberta's government on how nuclear energy could fit into our province's future energy mix before any decisions are made. So our goal today and throughout this process is to listen to and to reflect the input we hear from Albertans, Indigenous communities, municipalities, as well as industry and technical experts. And so the webinar that you joined this morning is part of our process to bring information and educational opportunities to those interested in engaging on nuclear energy. And so this morning, this webinar, it's primarily aimed at providing information based on previous input, and there will be an opportunity to gather your input and your perspectives. And your feedback is really important to help us understand the opportunities, the risks, and local priorities, and that will directly inform our recommendations to the province. So Alberta's government is using several distinct methods to gather feedback from Albertans. And this slide just shows how these engagement activities are organized into 3 key phases that will carry on into 2026. So the first phase of the engagement started in the summer, and it included gathering input from people across the province about what their interests are, any questions and concerns related to nuclear energy. And the goal there was to understand what are the issues that matter most and what topics they feel Alberta's government should address as it considers the future of nuclear energy in the province. So we launched an online public survey and a request for information from stakeholders in late August, both which closed on October 25th. We had more than 4,650 online surveys that were completed, and about 40 organizations provided a response to the RFI. And I want to thank everyone who took the time to participate in that. So the next phase of the engagement, you can see the red arrows where we are, and after that, where we're heading, that'll focus on information sharing on nuclear topics that were identified in that first phase. And that's part of what we'll be doing today, later this week, and into January as well. So we will be engaging further to understand perspectives on how Alberta could approach the possibility of enabling a nuclear industry in the province. So what have we heard so far? Well, certainly there's a lot of interest in a new nuclear energy industry in the province, what it could mean for the reliability of our power grid, but also job creation and new training opportunities for Albertans. We also heard some anticipated concerns about safety, the potential impact of nuclear facilities on health and the environment, and questions were also raised on long-term plans for nuclear waste storage and management, as well as how projects could be regulated in Alberta and how communities would be involved. As Parliamentary Secretary of Affordability and Utilities, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we've also heard questions specifically on how nuclear projects could potentially impact transmission costs and power bills. We remain open and interested to hearing if you share these concerns and if there are others that you may have. And that brings us to our next steps. So we want to make sure that every Albertan has a chance to participate in this engagement process. So if you know someone who's missed this morning's session, please let them know there is more opportunities to come. Another public webinar will be held later this week on December 10th from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. And we're also going to be hosting an in-depth session on nuclear safety and waste management. If you want to delve a bit further into those topics on maybe a more technical level, that's going to be held on January the 16th at 10:30 a.m. until noon. The panel and I will be engaging with Albertans, Indigenous communities, and municipalities, both virtually as well as in person throughout the early part of next year. So I encourage everyone to stay up to date on the nuclear energy engagement process by visiting www.alberta.ca/nuclear-energy-engagement. Also, I'm sure if you throw into Google Alberta Nuclear Energy Engagement, it'll be the first link to pop up. And all of these engagement activities that we've held to date and that we'll be hosting in the future, they will all feed into this single What We Heard report, and that'll inform the panel's advice to Alberta's government. So just in closing, I recognize nuclear energy is unfamiliar to many Albertans, and I encourage everyone to keep an open mind. As a panel, we're committed to listening and providing open and honest answers to questions or concerns. We believe in the potential of nuclear energy in Alberta. We're optimistic about the opportunities ahead. And this is an incredibly important conversation, and I look forward to continuing it in the months ahead and starting with all of you here today. So I thank you for all your time, and with that, I'll turn it back to Neil to introduce our first guest speaker.
Yeah, thank you, MLA de Jong. And I see that attendees here today some have found the question and answer post. Please do ask questions as they pop to your mind. We will, in the near future, we'll start having some question and answer session, answers of some of those items. But before that, it's my pleasure to introduce Professor Jason Donev, who will speak about Nuclear 101. Professor Donev's talk will provide foundational knowledge about nuclear energy, its principles, and its relevance to Alberta's future. Professor Donev.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to provide an overview of nuclear science and technology with a little bit of a focus on what that looks like in Canada. I am fond of saying that solving the world's biggest problems require understanding energy. Now, granted, there's a lot more to understand than just energy, and nuclear is a lot more than just energy, and we're going to focus on that intersection between nuclear power and energy. But the overview of what I'm going to say is provide a little bit of context on Canada's nuclear science and technology. I'm happy to answer further questions about that. I'm going to talk just a little tiny bit about nuclear reactions and how nuclear reactions are different from, say, chemical reactions. We're going to talk about the fuel cycle and a little bit about Canada's place in the fuel cycle. We're going to talk about uranium mining. We're going to talk about various types of reactors that have been built and have been proposed. We're going to talk a little bit about waste. We're going to talk about some nuclear organizations because there's an awful lot of organizations that are suddenly going to become very relevant in Alberta that haven't been before because we haven't had much of a nuclear sector here before. And then I want to briefly touch on some advantages and disadvantages because I want to be very clear. There are a lot of advantages to nuclear power. There are also some disadvantages to nuclear power, and those should all be brought to the table as we have a real and fulsome discussion. So nuclear science and technology saves lives. Among the various things that nuclear science and technology allows us to do is it allows us to actually do things like detect leaks. So we can have pipelines carrying various things, including natural gas, um, or hydrogen, things that items that Alberta is very interested in getting from point A to point B, and sometimes those leak. And we can use radiation to actually detect when those leaks happen and prevent an awful lot of environmental and personal devastation. We can preserve foods. So foods that are exposed to radiation retain all of their nutritional value but don't spoil nearly as quickly. And this is something that has been fighting hunger for many, many years at this point. Canada's involved in materials research. Smoke detectors, most smoke detectors have a little bit of americium-241, and the radioactive material there, the radiation is stopped entirely by that plastic container. It's really quite safe, and it's saving lives in homes in Canada. And that's the sort of thing that nuclear power does. Even emergency exit lighting winds up often being powered by radioactive isotopes produced here in Canada. Canada produces a lot of the isotopes that sterilize medical equipment, saving millions of lives every year. It also allows us to explore space and other frontiers of science. It allows medical imaging, detecting stowaways, and safety inspections that wind up keeping things like our airplanes flying properly in the air. And this is what Canada's doing. Canada has been a world leader in nuclear medicine. We were the first country to do a dosed cancer treatment using radiation. We actually had two different research groups, one in Saskatchewan, one in Waterloo. Being from the prairies myself, I really feel the Saskatchewan team was better, but truthfully, they were both doing great, great work decades ago. And that was cobalt-60 cancer therapy. Canada remains one of the leaders of cobalt-60 production. We have provided more molybdenum-99, a key medical isotope, than any other country in the world, as far as I can tell, over the course of many decades. And molybdenum-99 turns into technetium-99, and more than half of all radiopharmaceutical uh, procedures wind up using this key medical isotope that Canada has been producing. We do fundamental nuclear research at Triumph. I'm at the University of Calgary. Calgary is part of the consortium of universities that are probing the very limits of what we know with the microscopic world at Triumph. And also, Canada has built a really great nuclear reactor called the CANDU reactor. Um, CANDU reactors have been operating safely in Canada and abroad for many decades. This is amazing technology that has been working for a long time. It continues to work, but we're going to talk about next generation technologies that might be built after this. So I want to say that inside of a nucleus, so we've got atoms, everything on the planet, everything we touch, everything we interact with is made up of atoms. And inside the atoms, you have a little tiny dense core of material. And that little tiny dense core of material is more dense than you can possibly imagine. If you can imagine how dense the air is versus how dense, say, the ground is you're standing on, that's quite a bit of difference in density. The difference between the ground and the nuclear material is quite a bit more different than air versus the ground. So there's something holding this together. So there are four known forces in physics. We've only ever been able to find four. Gravity, the one we're familiar with that makes things fall inside of a nucleus, is really, really, really amazingly mind-blowingly small. I can't even come up with an analogy for that number, but the weak force is the next force. And the forces inside of a nucleus are roughly the same as the weight of the smallest raindrop that happens. It's two 10,000ths of a newton. So it's a newton is roughly the weight of an apple, which we find kind of funny given how Newton was working with apples to figure out gravity. But the electromagnetic force, this is what you use to stick your artwork to your kid's artwork to your refrigerator or something. This is also what powers all of chemistry. The electromagnetic force is quite a bit stronger. And inside of a nucleus, the electromagnetic forces are roughly the same as the weight of a beaver. So if you're looking at the weak force compared to the electromagnetic force, you can see that the weak force is really pretty weak because it's only the weight of a drop, while the beaver is considerably more. And that's the force that's pushing all of this apart. So there has to be something that's holding everything together. And the force that holds everything together, I'm going to skip the obligatory Star Wars jokes here, is the strong force. And the strong force is roughly the same as the weight of a moose. So for those of you who've actually, gone hunting or, had to drag a moose into, or even just run into a moose while you're out for a hike, the the weight of a moose is what's occurring inside of every single one of these atoms, other than hydrogen in our body, holding all of these things together. And what nuclear power does is it takes these forces and it actually uses the force, the strong force, the one that's the size of a moose, to power our electricity. And that's something pretty different. And that means, so this is my bundle of joy with my child there. Um, okay, so my kid hates that joke, so this this right here is what nuclear fuel looks like. This is also what nuclear waste looks like. It doesn't look like green goo in The Simpsons. I kind of feel like my entire career has been made just trying to talk to people about no, 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 nuclear power is not what you see on The Simpsons. Blinky the Three-Eyed Fish does not exist. It's not vats of green goo. It's a solid, and it's inside of a bundle, a metal bundle that looks like this. And this is enough electricity. If all of your electricity came from nuclear, this would be enough electricity for a family of four for 200 years. Okay? That means that if you, an individual, got all of your electricity from nuclear power, the waste from all of your electricity would fit inside of a soda can. So what's inside of that? Well, you have little fuel pellets that look like this. I've got three of them right here. Well, this is a mock-up. These are not actual real fuel pellets. They're just to give you an idea of the size. And you'll note that three of these are enough. Well, if you have 9 of these, that's enough for a year's worth of fuel. 3 of these is the same size as a AA battery. Okay? But AA batteries clearly would not provide you months of electricity. So where's all this come from? Well, the most famous equation in all of physics, and I assure you, the only equation I will have today, unless the questions go in a very different direction than I want. If you want me to do math, I'm happy to. But Einstein's famous equation of E equals delta mc squared. That delta just means the change in mass. So we have fusion, which is what powers the sun. We have radioactive decay, which is what we need to worry about after we've got our spent fuel, and more on that in a bit. And fission, which is when you send in a neutron to a really big nucleus that can actually break apart, and those really powerful forces inside of the nucleus push apart those two daughter products and sends out extra neutrons to make the nuclear reactions keep happening. This is all part of the overall nuclear fuel cycle. Now, we start with ore. The Earth gives us everything we have. As a friend of mine pointed out to me, everything we use was either mined or it's grown, right? Like the Earth is the source of everything we have. So we start with our nuclear power by taking 45 to 50,000 tons of ore, rock, out of the ground, and that we then take out about 170 tons of uranium. And if we do the American style of reactors, we have to go through this enrichment process where we take it and we turn it into a gas. We spin the gas around in a centrifuge to make it to sort out the different types of uranium. We then fabricate our fuel bundles. If we're doing the Canadian type of reactor, the CANDU reactor, we can skip that process and just take our uranium and put it into the fuel bundles. These fuel bundles then go into a power plant. That power plant winds up producing electricity. These have traditionally been very large power plants. Some of the largest power plants in the world are nuclear power plants. More on that in a bit. Once the fuel comes out, the fuel is hot both from the standpoint of radioactivity, but also kitchen stove hot. And it's kept underwater in an effort to keep everything safe. It will then eventually be, it's been proposed to be buried underground, and we'll come back to that as well. And that's what we call the nuclear fuel cycle. It's not really a cycle. It can go around in a circle as the diagram shows, but mostly we're taking a rock from the ground, we're getting energy from it, and the intention is to return it to the ground when it's done. So uranium comes from a hole in the ground. This is me in a hole in the ground, a half a kilometer underground in northern Saskatchewan, holding uranium. And somebody just played a practical joke on me. Uranium is really, really dense. So they handed it to me and it actually made me like fall down, and I was coming back up and laughing about it. And they got this picture. This is actually my favorite picture of myself. I love the way this looks, because uranium is just something I can hold in my hand. And it's safe to hold in my hand. I'm wearing gloves because it's, I'm in a mine, but it's actually safe to hold uranium in your hand because it's not all that radioactive. The location specifically was Key Lake up in northern Saskatchewan. This is the Athabasca deposit. The Athabasca deposit has an enormous amount of uranium in it. When I say enormous amount of uranium, this is the single largest high-grade uranium mine in the world. This mine, all by itself, produces a quarter of all the uranium in the world. Canada is an energy superpower. And with modern reactors using this uranium, there is more uranium in this mine than there is in all of the oil and all the natural gas and all the coal in Alberta. So we're exporting this. It's not as convenient to get at. So it's not like uranium is going to replace oil. That's a different conversation. But uranium is really, really prevalent, and this is something Canada has been producing for a long time. I want to point out that this is Cameco's operation, and Cameco is one of Canada's leading employers of Indigenous people, one of Canada's leading employers specifically of employing Indigenous people in the North. This is something that has to be done in partnership with Indigenous people, not with token, we'll talk about it. If we're going to do this, we have to do this fully by engaging the Indigenous community as partners. And that's what Cameco has been doing a good job of doing for a while. So how it works is you drill a hole, you drill a tunnel, and then you drill a bottom tunnel, you drill a hole, and you have this reaming head with a physicist for scale to come up and just drill that out, and then somebody comes through and scoops that up with a remote control truck. So the way fission works, there's of course a lot of details here I'm not going to get into. Again, happy to discuss this in more detail. But you start with the largest nucleus we find in nature. Uranium is the largest atom we find in nature. And we send in a slow-moving neutron, and the slow-moving neutron makes a lot of heat come out. And with that heat, we can make electricity. More on that in a second. But you also have two radioactive particles. And that's why when this starts, it's very, very safe from a radiation standpoint. And when it's done, it's something that we have to handle very carefully. We cannot be flip or trivial about handling nuclear waste, so we aren't. We take it very seriously. But it's these two daughter products that are actually giving off so much radiation. More neutrons come out, and those neutrons can come out and make more nuclear reactions happen, and that's how this goes. The rest of this, there's always a lot of questions about water, and those are good questions to have because water is essential to life. We owe so much of our life to water and keeping our water safe. So what we do is we have these fuel bundles, and that goes in what the boiler is. And everything from that point out is pretty much the same as the power plants that we already have in Alberta. So how much water will this use? It's going to use basically the same amount of water as any power plant producing that much electricity. So we put in the fuel that goes into the boiler, that heats some water, that makes steam. That steam pushes a turbine. That turbine spins around and spins a magnet near a loop of wire and sends out electricity. And for thermodynamic reasons that I'm happy to talk about, but have been asked not to because I talk too much about thermodynamics, we then have to take some heat out from that, and that heat goes out into some sort of cooling tower, some sort of river, some sort of lake, or the ocean in general. Now, the nuclear power plant that would be built here in Alberta still has to be determined. We don't know exactly what's going to happen to do that, but heat has to be taken out, usually into a large body of water or the atmosphere, one or the other. So these are what we call heat engines. So here we have the CANDU reactor schematic. It produces waste heat, which has to be properly taken care of. It produces solid waste, like this fuel bundle, but it doesn't produce any smoke. So it's not like a natural gas plant where you've got to have a smokestack with carbon dioxide and other things coming out the top. We've also talked about small modular reactors, and this is what most people are interested in the world, but there's a more modern form of the CANDU reactor that's being considered called a Monarch. That's one of the reactors that people are talking about building. Many people are talking about building small modular reactors. These are 300 megawatts. These can be built faster. They can be built in parallel. So there are some economic advantages to going with a small modular reactor versus the large reactor, which we might get into in the discussion. You can also talk about micro reactors. And the micro reactor, for example, I just picked this particular brand, the Avinci. I have some friends who work there. I'm not trying to endorse them. It is actually a really neat reactor. If we're talking off grid, if we're talking at a mine, if we're talking in, say, remote Alberta North, this might be the kind of reactor that we would look at. But this is too small to be practical in being all that helpful on the grid. We'd be talking more about the small modular reactor, but even smaller than this, the type of reactor we had here in Alberta, which operated safely for years in the pharmacy department at the University of Alberta. And as much as it pains me to say this as somebody from the University of Calgary, the University of Alberta did great things with this nuclear reactor. I had nothing to do with it. And I'm embarrassed about that because they did a great job. So we talk about the CANDU reactors, that's 700, the small modular, that's about 300, those micro reactors, which is 5, and the slowpoke reactor was a 0.02. So this kind of reactor operated safely for decades in Alberta. Most people weren't even aware there was a nuclear reactor in Alberta, specifically at the University of Alberta. But this is a very small reactor, and that's not really what we're talking about because this wouldn't be making electricity for the grid. But this is one of the ways in which we're doing some of that nuclear science and technology I talked about previously. This had been for a long time the largest nuclear reactor in the power plant in the world. 8 nuclear reactors, all together producing 6,348 megawatts of electricity. This one site produced the equivalent of half of Alberta's grid at the moment. And this has been producing a lot of electricity for Ontario for decades. This is on the Saugeen Ojibway Nation's traditional land, and Bruce Power is working very hard with the Indigenous engagement and reconciliation to try and do a better job of bringing Indigenous people into that conversation. And I have been part of that conversation, although more on the waste side than on the power plant side. So it's exciting to see people turning this into some real actions. In the short term, the nuclear waste comes out of those reactors and it's stored in what's functionally an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The International Atomic Energy Agency, so we have international watchdogs watching what's happening with the spent nuclear fuel. We also have cameras from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So nuclear is unlike other types of energy. Nuclear has to be regulated federally. So there's going to be provincial regulations and federal regulations. The federal regulations are already well established. Alberta still has to work out what it's going to do provincially. That's outside the scope of my expertise. But everybody is watching through these cameras in this Olympic-sized swimming pool. And you'll notice there's 2 people standing there, neither of which is me, but I have actually stood on that bridge with a Geiger counter. And the water is so good at blocking all the radiation. I got more radiation exposure because I had a Geiger counter with me flying from Calgary out to Ontario than I got from standing over a decade of spent nuclear fuel in that water because the water is just that good, but it allows us to actually see and make sure nothing's happening to our spent nuclear fuel. After it's been in there for 7 to 10 years, it goes into what's called dry storage. Again, here's a physicist for scale. That is actually warm to the touch because the concrete slows the radiation down from being something really, really harmful to being something that's just warm. And again, the thing that's on my chest there is a radiation badge. So they were actually checking to make sure how much radiation I got exposed to. And the answer was almost nothing. So the plan for Canada's spent nuclear fuel is the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, more on that organization in a few slides, has been engaging with the Ignace municipality and Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation. Full disclosure, I've been involved with that project for quite a while, representing Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and Ignace municipality to the NWMO. So they would come out, the NWMO would come out to the community, and I would be flown into the community. And I would be part of that conversation as the nuclear expert on behalf of the local group. And after, well, depending on how you define how long they've been talking about it, but at least 10 years, they voted in favor of having a deep geologic repository. So the plan is that you have these fuel pellets sitting inside this fuel bundle. This is empty, by the way. This has never had nuclear fuel in it. It would be quite a bit heavier if it actually had nuclear fuel. And then that sits inside of a used fuel container. And that used fuel container is a steel capsule with a copper block that sits inside of a bentonite clay block. And they keep switching it back and forth. They think the intention is to actually lay it the other direction. So I've got it sort of, this way. I think it's actually going to be this way. They've switched back and forth on that a couple times. I'm not up to date on which it is, but that's inside of some incredibly, incredibly old rock. And that rock is 2 billion years old and really, really stable. And the entire rock itself is roughly the size of the city of Calgary or the city of Edmonton. And they're going to hollow out tunnels to place these used fuel containers in there forever. So that's the plan. And at the moment, the local communities are working with the NWMO to show the CNSC, which are basically the nuclear police, to say, yes, we know what we're doing to do this safely. And that process is going to take another 20 years. Nuclear does not move quickly. So we've got a bunch of nuclear organizations. I've already mentioned the NWMO and the CNSC. So the NWMO is the government organization that's in charge of making sure that the nuclear waste is handled safely. Some people call it nuclear waste. Some people call it spent nuclear fuel. The important thing to remember is it's being handled. The money to do all of this is already set aside by the people who produce nuclear power. The CNSC, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, is the organization, which I believe we have representation here, is the organization that says this is what you are allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And I hate saying it when they're in the room, but the CNSC is actually world regarded as being an excellent regulator. When the CNSC interacts, because every country that has nuclear power has something like the CNSC, and other countries work with the CNSC to see how to do things well, because the CNSC is just recognized internationally as being such a good regulator. So those are relevant organizations that oversee things. There's also the Impact Assessment Agency and so forth, but they're not strictly nuclear. There's also the Canadian Nuclear Society, and if anyone is passionate about nuclear, either passionately for or passionately against, we invite you to join the Canadian Nuclear Society. And full disclosure, I'm one of the branch chairs for Alberta. So it's good for me if people join the CNS. So full disclosure on that. There's also Women in Nuclear, which is a wonderful organization, which I'm also a member of. They welcome everyone. And Women in Nuclear talks about how to further people's careers in nuclear, which I really appreciate as a professor. The Canadian Nuclear Association is the government lobbying group. The CNA is the organization that says, here's what we should do. So they petition the government, and so they're one of the organizations that petitions the government and so forth. So I want to talk about them. And then we've got Capital Power, which is a power producing company here in Alberta that has partnered with Ontario Power Generation, OPG. OPG owns the nuclear reactors in Ontario. So Capital Power and OPG are working together to see what's possible in some exciting ways. Nucleon Energy has also put forth some ideas about building nuclear reactors, and Energy Alberta is talking about building some of those larger reactors. Not so much, I mean, they're looking at SMRs a bit as well. But these are companies that are talking about this, and all of them are, of course, separate from the government of Alberta. Bruce Power had previously come through to work with Energy Alberta. Bruce Power is not currently involved, but if you've been involved in this conversation long enough to remember back in 2008 when this was happening, the last time, if you will, Bruce Power was one of the organizations that came to town as well. So to sum up, I want to say that nuclear power is safe and it is clean. We do a really good job of keeping it safe and keeping it clean. It is reliable. It is plentiful. It is operating nuclear power plants is CO2 free. Building them takes some CO2. Mining the uranium takes some CO2, but it's CO2 free. And it's really an important part of Canada meeting its emission targets for reducing CO2 emissions. It is easy, and I should throw quotes on that because it's easy to handle waste in that we've been doing it for decades. We know how to do it and we know how to do it safely. There are some disadvantages. It is slow to build. It's high technology. There's high upfront costs and it terrifies people. And I really commend the government of Alberta for being so transparent as to have these sessions and to have lots of conversations and to get these things talking about because terror doesn't do us any good. Fear helps keep us safe. But when fear turns into terror, it stops all the conversations. We need to have conversations with all the people involved, and those conversations are going to go on for a long time because this is high technology. The janitors who work at a nuclear power plant are the highest paid janitors in the world. So we at the University of Calgary, Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, SAIT, NAIT, University of Alberta, University of Lethbridge, the Red Deer, like there's all these different places that are going to have to gear up to train a nuclear workforce so that we can actually have these high quality, high technology jobs here in Alberta, not just Calgary, but here in Alberta. Because if we're going to do nuclear, we want to make sure we do it right. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for your attention. I will be one of many people answering questions. So if you ask a question that's outside my scope, they're going to send it to someplace else. Please be aware I'm not trying to get out of anything. We've lined up an entire team of experts, and I'm going to try and focus on what I'm expert in. Again, thank you so much for having me, and I'll turn the microphone back over to Neil.
Thank you, Professor Donev. I appreciate your overview of the industry and how nuclear energy works.